I was hoping to do the webinar straight through, but we had to take a little bit of a pause on that. So we are back now for the second part of a 3-part webinar day and afternoon with Allie. I am Allie Walford, your program director for the Parent Education Network. So the first workshop, we talked about parent and student rights and what those changes were when Senate Bill 850 and 1108 came around in 2015. Now we're going to go into IEP. So IEP is something that's very near and dear to me, and a topic that I love presenting on and sharing with families. I'm just going to share my screen a little bit. We have these wonderful presentations that we do. And I apologize, I thought I had that set up appropriately already. Always a learning curve, right? Always a parent first. So your guide to an individualized education plan that works for your child. So we're glad you're here. Thank you for being here and spending some time with me this afternoon. You will notice that our pen page has been very active. We know how important this time of back to school and transition is for you. So we have our workshops in English, Spanish, and Creole. We're trying to do them at a variety of times during the day, and then they're also recorded so you can access them a little bit later on. So who are we? We are Family Network on Disabilities. Our project is the Parent Education Network. And I'll just touch on this briefly because we had the introduction at our last webinar just a few minutes ago. We do not provide, diagnoses or practice law without a license. We are individuals with lived experience. Our children have had an IEP or a 504 plan, and they have some form of uniqueness about them that has brought us to this world that we call special needs. What we do is we provide support, information, and we help identify options for those families. So today the second part of this 3-part workshop is going to be on the IEP. Where is the IEP? What is the IEP? So the IEP is an individualized education plan, and that is part of IDEA, your Individuals with Disabilities Act. And so how does this law apply to your child? Well, typically I don't read from my notes, but there's just something here that's so important. I'm going to look down at my screen and read this to you. It is a part of this law ensures that children with disabilities have available to them a free and appropriate public education that emphasizes special education, related services designed to meet their unique needs, and this is the really important part of this particular law, prepare them for future education, employment, and independent living. That is the whole point of an IEP. The whole point of the IEP is to help our children that have a few additional struggles and challenges to be ready for further education, employment, or independent living, because that's what we all want. There are 2 parts of IDEA. There is Part B and Part C. Part C works with our children that are birth to 3, and then Part B is that 3 to 22. So in IDEA, there are 6 parts that we will cover today and talk about. And there's a lot of alphabet soup, a lot of initials. So your FAPE, we talked about already a little bit, is that free and appropriate public education. The IEP, which is the main part of this workshop right now, appropriate evaluations, parent and student participation, the least restrictive environment, and your procedural safeguards. So what is an IEP? An IEP is a written statement for each child with a disability that is developed, reviewed, and revised in accordance with Section 614D. And as you can see popping up there, I get lots of notifications from different organizations I belong to. I want to keep up on information relevant to this field that we have to navigate with our children. So who's on the team? So at an IEP meeting, there's a specified grouping of people that come together to meet your child's needs. And that is going to be the parent and the student, the ESC teacher, the general education teacher, the LEA, which is your local education authority. That's usually going to be your ESC specialist or case counselor. Each county uses a slightly different name for that. The psychologist, therapist, guidance counselor, interpreters. And as we talked about in that previous workshop, bring anybody you need to for your benefit. So RTI and MTSS, we're going to touch on this for just a minute. I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick. But one of the things that's really important to know is that all children are entitled to interventions that are going to help them meet their needs. So there's a phrase in the educational world, differentiated instruction. Our educators do a really good job of trying to differentiate our children's instruction as best as they can. But when we have children that need a little bit more, they're going to probably get identified to be on RTI, that response to intervention. So I'm going to go back to our triangle here real quick. And what that does is, the all down here is everybody. The yellow, the sum, is if you need a little bit more, and the few is, okay, we have to really provide some intensive interventions here. And if those interventions are not working, are we going to move forward and possibly request an ESC evaluation? Is that child going to need more explicit instruction and intervention that is outside of the RTI system and can only be delivered through an IEP? You should not have your evaluation delayed by the team saying that you need to go through the RTI process for data. You can do those two things concurrently, and that's important to note. So what is that process? What is that process of special education? Well, you have the pre-referral, which will often include the RTI, the actual referral, identification, eligibility, the development of the IEP, the implementation of the IEP, and the evaluation and reviews. We're gonna go back the other way. Oh, it's moving us forward. We did not want to go that forward. Bear with me, folks. We're just going to get back onto the screen that we want to, because this is just too important to miss. So that process, we talked about the pre-evaluation, the pre-referral. So you think something's going on and you've identified that your child may need some additional support. That's when you have those parent-teacher conferences. You come in and you say, what's going on? If the interventions are not working, then you would ask for a referral. You'd send an email typically to that ESE specialist or case care manager saying, I give consent that you evaluate my child for ESE services. Once you sign and they have received that intent, that letter of consent, there is about a 60-day window which the school district must process the evaluation, get your child evaluated, and then come back and share those results with you. And that's going to be during the identification and the eligibility period. So when they come back with those results and you look, yes, there's some deficiencies here. We do see some areas of concern that could use some additional support. Then the team decides if there is an eligibility. Under IDEA, there are 14 eligibilities, specific eligibilities that can be put on an IEP. One of the broader categories is one called OHI, other health impaired. And many of our students who struggle with ADHD and some of those executive functioning challenges, their eligibility would be OHI. It's very, very important to note that the eligibility does not drive the IEP. Your individual child's needs are what drives that IEP, those goals, those services, and any potential accommodations or modifications that may be needed for your child. Where are all those things done? They are done in the development of the IEP. And we're going to talk about that in a few more slides. The implementation of the IEP. Once everybody's gotten together, you've put together a really great plan of education for your child, then you want to make sure that it's being implemented. Every quarter, when your child gets their interim report, there should be additionally an IEP interim. Is your child in progress of being ready to master those goals that the team has set up? And then having your triennial, every 3 years, evaluations and reviews of measuring that progress of your child. Of course, teachers in classrooms and schools do many assessments, both informal and formal, not only on an annual basis, but on a quarterly basis. Teachers are constantly assessing where their children are. It's just that that formal evaluation, reevaluation process is every 3 years. So what are the, excuse me guys, I got an itch here. What are the pieces of an IEP? You know, it can be a really daunting document, particularly to families that are just beginning their journey. The very first thing you're going to see on your IEP is the present level of performance. So where is your child performing? So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen for a minute and just really talk to you, because this is an area and a topic that I know pretty well. You walk into the meeting and your coordinator, your point person comes to you and says, okay, mom, tell me about little Jerome's, what is he like? Tell me about your child. What do you need for your child? And for me, for my son, it was, oh, I don't want him to run away. I don't want him to forget to turn in his homework. It was all the negatives. I just had so many things, that areas of need that I thought my son had. One of the best benefits that I have learned in the process of my last 13 years is a strengths-based parent input. Reframing those challenges that your child may have to how they could be an asset. You know, so one of the words I learned was pervasive. Oh, well, your son is very pervasive. You know, once he gets an idea in his head, it's really hard to get it out of it. And so I saw that as tenaciousness. I saw that as he is going to work really hard at what he wants to work at. So while we'd have to get him to move in a direction of doing those non-preferred activities, I really had to reframe that language, not only how they were looking at my son, but how I was looking at my son. So the parent input is the parent version of the present levels of performance. So some districts call it PLP, other districts call them PLOP, but it is, where is your child performing specifically and explicitly at the time that that particular IEP is being written. That present level of performance is going to be written into each domain on the IEP. And we're going to talk about those domains in just a second. Your measurable goals. We're also going to talk about measurable goals and how those are the drivers on your IEP, and how to write those measurable goals, and what are we looking at when we do our goals. The explanation of progress. How is your child meeting those? The description of services. Placement, also known as LRE, your accommodations and modifications, those related and supplemental services, the time, the amount and duration of those services, and a statement of transition, which we talked about quite a bit at the first portion of this 3-part webinar. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. And we are going to be on, well, we're moving a little slow. What's supposed to pop up is our levels of performance. So there's those domains that we talked about. IEP, and this is prior to the transition IEP that starts at 14. In the IEP, you have curriculum and learning environment. Some districts call that academic or instruction. So wherever the schoolwork part of the day is happening, that's going to be in that first part. Social and emotional, independent functioning, healthcare, and communication. Each one of those domains is going to have a present level of performance in each of those domains, and they share their concerns and their observations. You can as well include your input there. So you have the general parent input section at the beginning, but in here, you can share those observations that you see at home that they may not actually see. So for curriculum and learning, how does your child process that information? You know, how are they interpreting that information? What is their preferred learning style? You would want to indicate or make sure that the school is aware and they're letting you know, is your child an auditory learner? Are they a visual learner? Do they need a redirection to task? And the redirection to task could also be under independent functioning. For social and emotional, how well does your child socialize with their peers? How do they function under pressure, timeline, and stress? Is the disability that your child struggling with directly impact their performance in their classroom? That was our case. As we said, there are 14 exceptionalities in IDEA, and one of them is called emotional behavioral, and that was our experience. There was some really profound impulse control issues, and he just needed a lot of extra support. So while he was a real bright, real smart kid, and when, you know, the learning environment was optimal for him to work, he would produce really well. But if we weren't managing that environment right for my child to function because of his social emotional challenges, he wasn't going to perform academically. And then the independent functioning. Independent functioning, can your child complete their tasks independently? And that's a wide variety of things, from turning in the homework to self-care. Is your child able to toilet independently? Maybe their challenges impact them in that way. Health. What are the specific healthcare needs of your child? Do the people working with your child need some specific training? And then communication. So this one is particularly where our speech and language pathologists support us. How's their language? Are they how's their receptive and expressive language? Do they understand language? Can they do 1- and 2-step commands? Are they able to express their parts, their wants and needs back to the people that are working with them? All of those things can be addressed in these particular domains of the IEP. Each of those domains have the opportunity to have goals in them. So I know that many of us have heard of SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So specific, you really want to narrow down what that child and that teacher is working on. So one of my favorites to use as an example was Z will stay in his assigned area and complete all tasks assigned. Wow. Okay, so we're remeasuring the independent functioning ability of staying in his area, the independent functioning ability of staying on task, or the academic ability of being able to finish his work. So maybe a more appropriate goal would have been Z will stay in with teacher directing or without teacher directing, depending on what the level of the child was. Z will stay in his assigned area 20 out of 30 minutes of every half an hour period, as measured by teacher observation. Well, that's pretty restrictive. You know, that would be for a child that really has a lot of movement issues, but it's very specific. You know, so if the child only has a little bit of movement issues, then the goal could still be specific by saying Z will stay in his assigned area during individual center time throughout the classroom day. And so that's more organic and more natural to what his non-disabled peers are doing, what his classmates are doing. Is he staying in his area? So is it a measurable goal? Are you able to have a start point and an end point? Are you able to see where that progress is? So let's look at an academic goal. Given an nonfiction passage, Z will answer 3 direct questions and prove referencing in the statement, like provide a cite, resource, cite an example. That's going to be measurable, you know, like he has to find it. He has to show them that he's going to find it. Attainable. Is it something that the child is going to be able to do? You don't want to make it too easy. Definitely not. But say you have a 3rd grader who is reading on a 1st grade 3-month level. So maybe the goal might be child A reading an instructional passage at a 3rd grade 6-month level will show will answer 3 comprehensions questions with 80% accuracy. Again, super specific, super measurable. We know what we're looking for, and it's just a little bit of a stretch. So they may be in 3rd grade, but they're reading at the beginning of that 1st grade level. Let's push and see if they can read up to that end of that 1st grade level. And then attainable and realistic very much tie in together. And then timely. When are you going to measure it by? When does this student have to master or accomplish this particular goal? The description of services. So we have specialized instruction, related services, and supplemental services. And I know a lot of parents get confused about this sometimes. So the specialized instruction is going to be that area where the child really is having a deficiency. Is the point of the IEP is they need a little bit more than their classmates do. So a lot of specialized instruction is going to come in the form of reading, ESE reading teachers. There's a significant I believe the highest percentage of challenges are with the specific learning disabilities community. Then maybe there is specialized instruction in counseling. Maybe you need to have my child needed to have some counseling services on impulse control or appropriate peer relationships. Anything that's going to be outside of the norm of that general education classroom. So, and then those related services, that is going to be your SLP, your, and that's not our next slide. Your SLP, your speech language pathologist, your occupational therapist. Do we need to have some of those abilities to navigate the educational environment in a physical way addressed by the OTs? And then the supplemental services, we'll go into those in a minute through the accommodations and modifications. All right, so placement and least restrictive environment. Very, very, very important. And this has been said for over 30 years now. Special education programs are not programs and they're not places. It's individual interventions and accommodations and modifications for individual children to meet their best potential. So ideally, we would like to have our children in the least restrictive environment. That's going to be your general education classrooms, fully included all of the time. And that is most of our first students. In Florida, we shoot for an 80% inclusion rate. So what that means is 80% of our students with IEPs should be in a general education classroom 80% of their school day, if that's what's appropriate for them, receiving their services. So if you'll look on our screen here, the next thing it talks about is pull out or push in services. Are they going to a resource room? Is an ESE teacher or a support facilitator coming and pushing into the classroom and working on things? If that is not what is best needed for that individual child, are they in a self-contained classroom? Are they in that classroom that they can have more intensive teacher-child ratios, work more closely on those goals, and get them back into as much of the general education day as possible? There are also ESE or alternative schools. Some counties will call them a center school. And all of these decisions need to be made through the IEP team and with parent consent. We actually had to do that. We had to use a center school. And I will tell you from personal experience, in the beginning, it was a little bit scary. Truly one of the best moves that we did. It was very therapeutic, very supportive, had a really strong IEP, made a lot of gains in the 2 years that he was there. And then we were able to transition back into a general education classroom halfway through his 5th grade. Elementary school and high school were all in general education classes with support. And it faded away. At the end of his high school career, it was the support facilitator, the ESE specialist as needed on a consultation basis, and 30 minutes a week with a counselor. So having spent, 3rd, 4th, and half of 5th grade in a full-time alternative placement to where he had progressed to at the end of his high school career, it was pretty spectacular. Additionally, if need be, other environment could be your hospital homebound or residential school. And again, all of these decisions must be made by the ESE team. So our accommodations and modifications. So an accommodation allows a student the same assignment or test as other students, but maybe a changing in the time, the format, or the setting, or the response. So for example, maybe the particular student really struggles with their attention issues. Maybe they have a ADHD and it's pretty significant for them. They would need a small group testing, potentially extended time, and maybe even a redirection to task, whether it's a verbal or a nonverbal. Hey, come on, Sally, let's get back to work here. That's an accommodation. An accommodation is going to kind of help level that playing field, give some tools to do that same level of work that the classmates without IEPs are doing. So a modification is an adjustment to an assignment or a test that changes the standards of what the assignment is supposed to measure. So maybe the rest of the class is doing 25 multiplication problems and Sally is only doing 15, So they should be chosen. These modifications need to be tailored to the needs of a child. It's very important to presume competence for all of our children. Don't make a modification for a child that doesn't need it. Let them have a stretch, let them have something to work at. And then ask the student, what do you need? How do you need to be successful with this? And then make this, again, everything is a team decision. Everything gets worked on together. We did just talk about this in the previous workshop, that statement of transition. So when the child does turn 14, you're going to talk about those post-school outcomes. You're going to educate both the parent and the individual about the age of majority. When your child becomes 18, They make their own decisions. You would be invited to the IEP meeting as a courtesy. So you want to make sure that you have those strong relationships with your child and help them navigate that transition. And then the self-determination. What does the young adult want? What does that individual want? Do they want to go to college? Do they want to go to a technical school? Do they want to go straight to the workforce? As best as possible, communicate with them what they would like to do after they graduate high school. In the IEP, you will also talk about the extended school year. So the big factors of the extended school year are regression and recruitment together, mastery, self-sufficiency, independence, successive interruptions, and the severity of the disability. So if your child is going to experience a severe regression of their abilities by not being in that environmental educational environment, then you can start discussing the role of extended school year for your child. Are they going to lose those skills if they take the summer off? Where are they with the mastery? Do they need to continue? Are they just on the cusp of really mastering a skill? And then, it goes back to that regression. Will they lose that if they take the summer off? Are they at that place of self-sufficiency and independence yet? Will taking that time away impact their abilities when they come back to school? And so those extended school year discussions start happening around March, and you want to be in close collaboration both with your child's teacher and with the ESE specialist. What's important to remember, as with all things with special education, it's a process. It takes time. We don't know what we don't know. Ask the questions. I know you guys have heard it before, but there really is no thing as a dumb question. If you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer. Planning, writing, monitoring. The planning part is really imperative. You have to have a plan to know where you're going. So that is, important. On the parent side of it is educate yourself. Utilize our website, fndusa.org, and those resources. Go to our resource tab and look around in there and see what we have. There's also another great site called Rights Law. Been around for a very long time, a wealth of information. One of the things that we say often is, if it wasn't written, it didn't happen. You have a great conversation with your child's classroom teacher in the pickup line for our elementary school parents. Capture that, email that teacher back. Oh, thank you so much for taking your time and telling me about Jonathan's issues with getting along with his peers. Maybe we need to look at some of his independent functioning goals, or maybe even some of his social emotional goals. Maybe he's just really has an issue with that impulsivity and needs some specific guidance on what appropriate peer relationships look like in the classroom. If you put that in writing, then you'll have a documentation that you've had a concern about something if it does happen to escalate. It's just a good practice to always have things in writing. And then monitoring, making sure that people are executing the IEP the way that it was written and agreed upon as the team. So tips to succeed, relationships are so very important. For 13 years, had parent-teacher conferences the 5th week of every quarter. So that's from kindergarten through 12th grade, the 5th week of every quarter. Well, why the 5th week? Well, the 4th week was interim reports. And so that's when we found out where my child, all children, where are they performing? What do their grades look like so far? And it was halfway through the quarter. So there was an opportunity to find out if your child wasn't experiencing success somewhere, where was that gap? Why were they not experiencing that success? Why is that grade not where it needs to be? Was the work not turned in? Was the work not understood? At that 5th week, you still have an opportunity to catch up on things. Maybe the extended time wasn't allowed. Maybe there was a change of teacher and the new teacher didn't know about the IEP, didn't know about the extended time. The student was still working on their self-advocacy and they didn't make the teacher aware, hey, I get extra time for this, or hey, I'm supposed to go to the testing room. So if you have that positive relationship with your teacher at that ground level, it's really going to help everything be smoother. Attend all meetings. I know it's really hard. I know a lot of us have more than one job, but it is so important to make your child a priority and hold the school accountable too. If you just cannot make a meeting when they said that they need to do their meeting, say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to make that. Here are 3 alternate dates for me. Please schedule it during this time. The schools really need to work with our parents trying to be collaborative as well. Signature on the IEP only confirms your attendance. If you are disagreeing with the IEP, put that in the parent input section. So you provided your parent input at the very beginning, you went through all the present levels of performance, you went through the goals, you went through the services, and there are some things that got on there that you really just disagree with, but they're not taking it off. Say, excuse me, please go back to the parent input section. I'd like to put in that I significantly disagree with X, Y, and Z. And then try and have your records organized. It's really important to keep track of our records and what we need. You can do that either through a binder or Google Docs platform is a wonderful way to keep an eye on all of our different documents. What to bring to an IEP? Something to write with. Bring your notes, bring something to write your notes on. Bring a partner, bring somebody to help support you. Any list of questions. I always wrote my questions ahead of time. If at all possible, try and get a draft IEP ahead of time. That's not going to be your goals. You're going to develop those as a team, but those present levels of performance should be written before you actually move into the IEP meeting. Ask for that draft so you can see where your child is at and so you can prepare those questions. If you have work samples that illustrate where your child is performing at. So say your child gets a little bit of OT at school for walking. Maybe they're in a walker due to cerebral palsy and they're really struggling. The school says they're really struggling with walking and that maybe you should consider a wheelchair at this point. But then you have a video of kiddo just tearing it up through the house on the 4-legged walker. Bring in that video and show it to the team. Any private evaluations that you want to share, any new contact information that need to share. Did you move? Do you have a new phone number? Is there a new person in the child's life? Maybe the grandparents have moved to the area and are going to help support you. This one's really funny, but we never think about it. A bottle of water. And I like cool water, a nice cool bottle of water. It reminds me to breathe. I take a deep breath before I take a sip, and then I exhale, and it helps me keep my emotions in check. The collaborative mindset, ideally we all want what's in the best interest of that child, and let's be collaborative about it. Maybe the school has thought about something that we haven't thought about, and let's be open to hearing what they have to say. All right, so that brings us to the end of part 2 of our 3-part webinar for today. This is a screenshot of our FND University. If you go to www.fndfl.org, we have our website, and here on the resources tab would be our FND University. It is in English and it is in Spanish, and we have a wide variety of workshops in there. And I would also encourage looking at our tip sheets too. All of our tip sheets are in 5 languages: English, Spanish, Haitian Creole, Portuguese, and Russian. And then if you need to call or you have any additional questions, we would encourage you to reach out to 800-825-5736 or fnd@fndusa.org. And our administrator would get you directly to one of the directors that's going to be in the area where you need to be. So let me just play with my screen real quick here to get us on the next workshop. We're going to be talking about the supported decision making. So let me get this in presentation mode. Actually, I don't think I am sharing my screen right now, but I can't see me because I can't see me right now. If you have any questions, please go ahead and leave them in the box, the comments box. We should be posting on Facebook Live right now. All right, we are not sharing our screen, so I'm gonna again ask you guys to just bear with me for technology's sake. Share screen. And we are going into substitution decision. So again, if you are just joining us, my name is Allie, Director for the Parent Education Network. My son just graduated high school this past June here in Broward County Public Schools, and I'm a mom of a child that had an IEP for 12 years. Everyone at Family Network on Disabilities has a child that has unique abilities. We're not acting as attorneys. We're not practicing law without a license. We're not practicing medicine without a license. What we are doing is we are providing support, information, and helping families identify options through our lived experience. What is substitute decision making? So we're going to talk about that today in today's workshop. So substitute decision making is when someone has taken that ability away from another person. So they're substituting. They are doing all of the decision making for another individual. So whether it's a parent or a guardian or a legal entity that's working with an individual, they're doing all the decision making. What we're going to talk about today is how to transition out of that substitute decision making into supported decision making. How do we help individuals achieve a supported decision making process? So who's driving the decision making? Is it the family member? Is it a court appointed a guardian? If it is someone that is not the individual directing their own life, then it is substitute. Now, absolutely, there are some individuals out there that need a significant amount of support. Maybe there's a cognitive impairment, and without that support, they might be taken advantage of. But there can still be a good level of them providing input to the outcomes that they want in their life. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So with the substitute decision making, what are some of those decisions that are being made? The guardian or the parent could be making decisions about that individual's health. They could be making decisions about their living arrangements. They could be making decisions about their financial lives. Those are all very personal things. And what we're going to talk about today is what is the best way to incorporate that individual on providing feedback of what they want. So supported decision making gives people with the disabilities the help that they need to make the choices for a self-directed life. And we support them through person-centered planning. It helps them give a better quality of life. It leads to them participating in that decision-making process in their life. let me just see something here real quick. So the kinds of support that we could provide, and we talked about this a little bit at one of the previous screens, was that financial advice, that medical, employment, independent living, school-related, personal care. So medical advice, you know, as much as the individual as able to contribute, listening to them, you know. So there's such a wide spectrum of individuals with disabilities, children with disabilities that need IEPs. But I can give a very specific example. So my child had an emotional behavioral eligibility. He's recently just graduated from the high school system, and we utilized medication as part of his interventions from 6 to 17. And about halfway through his senior year, he was pretty determined not to take those medications anymore. And we had a really we had a very informed conversation with his therapist and with other healthcare professionals of what is that going to look like if you don't take your medication. This is a highly individualized decision. We're not telling anybody what decision to make, but in the individual case of my child, we were able to put some other interventions in place so that he could say, you know, that is not the decision I want to make. Independent living. So maybe we have a child that has some pretty significant and physically complex needs, and the parents it's really difficult for them to support that at home, and you're getting a little bit older, so the child maybe is going to go into a residential facility or a group home. Talk to the individual. You know, do you want to share a room? Is it possible to have a room by yourself? What would you like up on the walls of your room? The main purpose, I believe, of this particular workshop, from substitutes to supported decision making, is listening to the individual and what do they feel that they need. That's not, and you have to use your judgment, what is not going to impact them. What we don't want to endanger or harm anybody, but let them have a say over their own life. How to choose who helps. So who's going to be involved in that process of helping that individual? I know later on with teenagehood, the support facilitator or the ESE teacher, the counselor at the school system, much more effective than me as mom, or even potentially one of the private therapists or a peer. Maybe a peer is going to be someone that's going to be a good person to help support them with those decision making. So what is your role in this? Well, your role is to, much like us here at Parent Education Network, is to provide options, support, and resources, but allowing the person with the disability as best as possible to be the ones to make that final decision. And as caregivers, it's hard sometimes. It's hard to trust that that individual knows what's best for themselves. So I would recommend, doing it in a scaffolding way and in many steps. This is something that is really good for the transition IEP. So when your child turns 14, the IEP changes and it becomes a transition IEP, and you really start talking about those post-school outcomes and those self-determination, those communication skills. All of those things in supported decision-making can be incorporated in the IEP through some goals, in the portion of an independent functioning. Do we teach the person how to self-advocate? Well, how are they going to self-advocate? How are they going to communicate so that their wants and needs are heard? And then how do we help them understand when it's just not possible for maybe a particular want to come to pass because it's just not the best decision for that child or that individual? Meaningful activities. So I think it's really important, especially moving into some independent functioning for our children, is give them some choices and give them some chores. So for breakfast, do you want oatmeal or do you want cereal? Okay, are you do you want the red bowl or do you want the blue bowl? Okay, we're done eating now. We're going to put the dishes in the sink or the dishwasher, and then holding them accountable for that. I think when we give our children that have some, unique challenges, more responsibility, and give them tasks that we think that might be beyond them, I think they're going to surprise us. It's important to have those medical activities, and it's a great way to teach that individual how to start self-advocating about what they want, especially when you use or statements. Do you want to do this or do you want to do that? So start early, start real young, like we talked about, build it into that IEP, especially in that independent functioning section and those self-advocacy and self-determining, and allowing the child to make those choices. Set some goals. If you want to do this, how are you going to get there? And then teach that individual, again, to the best of their ability, what's the short-term objective to get to the long-term goal. And absolutely, as appropriate, incorporate them into those life discussions. So one of the ways that we can do that is, again, through the IEP, through their really utilizing that self-advocacy. Have your child attend that IEP meeting. They get invited at 14, but start going sooner. They don't have to sit there for the whole time, but particularly at the beginning of the IEP, what do you want? What is going to work for the individual child? Let them give input. If you're talking about reading, let that child talk about their challenges or their strengths. Oh, I really want to read this book, or I didn't like that book. I really like math, but I really struggle in social studies. Get their input on them. Incorporate them in their doctor's appointment. When the doctor starts talking to you and they're a teenager, direct them to your child, or say to your child, well, I don't know, Jonathan, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts? Start asking them about their post-school plans. Where do you want to live? What do you want to do? What are your interests? How can you turn a hobby into potential employment? Maybe you've been getting I've forgotten the name of it now, but when you get the therapy with the horses, you've been doing this therapy for a really long time and you really like the horses, maybe you want to be a veterinarian. The child may not potentially be cognitively able to be a veterinarian, but maybe it's going to be a vet tech. So using those life experiences. So I had kind of tapped my screen and moved on to the next one, but we are a family network on disabilities. And we've talked about it multiple times on this webinar, but our website is www.fndfl.org, where we have our parent university. These are modules that you can do on your own time in all things special education. We have them in English and we have them in Spanish. And again, I just want to show you this screen for a moment. If you have any questions at all, or if you'd like for me to come out and do a face-to-face workshop with your organization, a support group, or even your school, please give me a call at 800-825-5736, or you can email at fnd@fndusa.org. I want to thank everybody so much for joining me this afternoon. I know that Jasmine will be back tomorrow, Tuesday, providing a couple of workshops, and let's look and keep our eyes open to see what the rest of the week holds. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you soon.